мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Today at 1, we're live in Ukraine as Russia invades in a major military assault by land, sea and air.
It's now more than a month since the US Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. China's ambassador to Australia also issued a blunt warning a few days ago that those who push for Taiwanese independence will be punished.
We're waiting for a peaceful reunification, but we cannot rule out other options.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore.
Welcome to Why We Fight. Democracy is at war. Around the globe, we're watching the forces of authoritarianism rise. From regimes like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea to oligarchs, religious extremists, and populist demagogues. There are those who resist. Activists, journalists, academics, soldiers, faith leaders, and politicians. In this series, you'll meet them. You'll hear their stories, what they do, what democracy and freedom mean to them, and why it's worth fighting for. If you believe in this mission, don't forget to like and subscribe. Patreon and Substack supporters get early access and exclusive extras. And if you want to connect with others who care about democracy and a free, living world, join us on Discord. For my written work and commentary, check out my Substack, Dictators v Democrats. With that said, let's go. Welcome to this episode of Why We Fight. I am very glad to be here in London in the wonderful National Liberal Club with a bit of a legendary journalist who's been around the world, who has covered almost every shooting war in the last 20 odd years, Mr. John Sweeney. Thank you very much for being here with us, John.
It's the last 40 years, actually.
That's 40 years.
Just saying.
Wow. So, seen rather a lot, I would say.
Yeah, too many. I'm trying to write my memoirs at the moment, and Theo, it's a bit like digging your own grave, or doing wedding invitations. And the issue is not, the people you invite; it's the people you don't invite. And I'm finding it hard to. Too many stories, too many terrible things, but also too many strange and funny things as well. Nobody writes very much about the giggles of war, and you'll know because you've been to the front line in Ukraine. On a number of occasions, you'll know that there's a moment where something terrifying happens, and then somebody breaks wind. And then everybody in the car laughs as because you're about to die, and then something very, very funny happens. And I do feel that this is an underreported part of war. And the other thing, which is why I've always, it's essential rule, and one should never lie to your readers or listeners or viewers. You should never lie to the public. And I think it's okay to be sympathetic to, say, for example, the invaded, not the invaders. That's okay. That's very, very okay. But sometimes the invaded do terrible things, and the little guy does something horrible. So the story of Israel-Palestine is, Israel was once, this tiny little nation surrounded by a sea of Arabs who hated them. But now Israel is an incredibly rich and enormously well-defended country with nuclear weapons, which is pummeling the Palestinians, in part because the Palestinian leadership, or at least the Hamas leadership, did a terrible thing. But your sympathies can change. However sympathetic you are, you must always tell the truth. But within that, one of my little rules, or one of my instincts, is that I always go with the people with the better jokes. And in Russia, Ukraine, that's Ukrainians, full stop. And I've spent I have seen what the Russian army did in Chechnya, and I've been locked up by the Russian police pretty much, I would say, on the instructions of the Russian secret police in Moscow for an afternoon. Only an afternoon, but it wasn't nice. And I've actually been arrested by the Ukrainians, and my Ukrainian arrest was way more funny and way more entertaining.
I've seen where you were arrested. Yes. But this is a question I ask of myself, and I ask of every journalist who's done this, who goes to these wars, not just journalists, but aid workers as well, people who don't have to be there. Why?
Well, I actually think we do have to be there because we have. So it starts earlier than this. In that I set out to. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I went along when I was 15 to Winchester Crown Court. I went to Barton Peveril Grammar School in Eastleigh, and Winchester is the nearest town with courts in it, and it was a rape case, and it was. I always wanted to be a defence lawyer, but it was obvious to me that the accused was guilty, or that's how I felt about it. And the defence lawyer defending the accused ripped into the character of the poor woman who was the victim, was giving evidence against him, and she was almost struck dumb by the trauma of the whole thing and the humiliation and the embarrassment of it. And there was a class thing too as well, in that the barrister was posh, articulate and pitiless. And I was disgusted by the whole nonsense, and I walked out of court and I thought, well, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. And then there was a careers evening at Barton Pev, and there was a series of pretty boring talks. And then I went along to the journalist, and the journalist guy said, listen, everybody thinks journalism's glamorous. I'm just going to go home and watch Miss World on the telly just like everyone else. But he had a lovely sense of humour. And I thought, no, I want to do that. And then I actually got an internship at The Economist, then I got a job at the Sheffield Telegraph. Then I sort of freelanced in Fleet Street in the 80s, and then I became a reporter on The Observer. And essentially what's driving me is simply, it's very simple. I'm a storyteller. I've got a natural gift for being a storyteller. And the best stories, power and money, do not want told. I want to say to people, you shut up. And so the logic means that wherever you start, and at one point I was writing shopping guide for South Yorkshire housewives, and I was famously bad at it, which is why they kept on giving it to me again and again and again. And all the time I was dreaming about being a war reporter, and then suddenly you're a war reporter and you walk into a room that you didn't know existed, and you see terrible things, but you can't get out of that room, you can't go back to your old self. And there is, and that's dark and difficult. But at the same time, why am I here? Why am I in this, fucking war zone? Why did I go to Bakhmut 7 times? For example, I went there because this is classically a story that power and money, the Kremlin's power and the Kremlin's money doesn't want told. And when you see it, the beautiful old disabled lady who didn't want to move, who had a community of old people, she was essentially the chemist, the ancient apothecary. She was getting the Amazon's or Google supplies or whatever of drugs for her small group of stubborn, elderly, maybe a bit batty, stay-behinds, and she would dole out their drugs, or they would come to her place and pick up the medicines. And so when you see her courage, and under big, nasty artillery bombardment, as it was in 22, before drones really took off, you felt this is a hero, and I wanted to tell her story. And you can't do that if you don't meet her and sort of bump into the story. But once you're there, you feel terribly proud to tell that story. And also, all I'm doing is telling the story of ordinary people who wouldn't be famous at all. But there's something about the aristocracy of the human soul which is incredibly moving and powerful. And then that means that you're suddenly exposing yourself to terrible risk. But the risk is no longer at the forefront of your mind. And if it is, you shouldn't be there. At the forefront of your mind is, what's my job? My job is to tell stories that power and money don't want told. Here I am. And it's pretty fucking good in terms of telling the story. So that's why you end up in these awful places. Is it worth dying for? No. But also the other thing, yes, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. Because good people, and bad people too, actually, but societies, they need honest news, like they need guns, like they need teachers, like they need doctors, like they need everything that civilization brings. And we are part of that. So it's not like we don't have to be there, we have to be there.
How's your understanding of power and money changed over the last 40 years?
Not that much. Not that much. I can remember I was on the Sheffield Telegraph and there was a woman, she'd won some supermarket prize and she'd been diddled out of it. And when I read out to her the official reply from a supermarket, she said, "Who's that kidding?" to the supermarket. So it hasn't changed that much. I never thought the government of the United States of America would be absolutely central in my sights. Now, obviously, I grew up during Vietnam and I had a map of the Vietnam War in my bedroom at home, and I was kind of fascinated by it. But after the last helicopter left Saigon, and then it became Ho Chi Minh City and all that stuff, there was a big change, and America changed, and then you had Carter. And America improved. Now, maybe you can say the war against Saddam. The first war against Saddam was utterly justified. The second, not that so much. But the idea that America would now be kind of in bed with the Kremlin, this is what seems to be, that's astonishing. So that's a kind of geopolitical, geostrategic change, which is terrifying, and that's happened in my lifetime. But that's, in a sense, in talking in two particular ways. The targets of my journalism are people who use their power and money to shut people up, who try and steal somebody else's land, who kill people for no good reason. And there never is a good reason to kill lots and lots of people. It's just wrong. Now you can say, hold on, Second World War, and also I think what Ukraine is trying to do. What Ukraine is defending itself. There's never a good reason if you're being the invader. It's different if you're defending. And that's why I do my best to tell the stories of Ukraine. To be honest, why are we here in London? And the simple answer is that I've got a bad leg. I fell over while delivering crutches in Kyiv, and I can't run anymore. And so this makes me a liability in the front line given drone wars. Now before, this is up to 22, 23, you could go to the front line, and I did, because you were taking a risk that the artillery wouldn't hit you. And it was random, more or less. So you had a reasonable chance, unless it was heavy, of getting away with it. And my rules within that was I'd try not to go to the front line, and I'd try not to be too stupid, because the kind of stories I tell are more like feature stories, something that could turn into maybe a book or a chapter or a long newspaper article. I'm not that interested in bang bang. I've seen it before and far too many times. So I like stories, and you can't get people to tell good stories right at the front line because they're fizzing with anxiety or terror, and people are just plain mad. You go back 10 miles, 5 miles, you can still hear the bang bang going on, but you can have a conversation and you can work stuff out. The best place, and if young journalists are listening to this, is hospitals, because there's a story there. There's some poor kid who's injured, his mum and dad, and the doctors who speak English. So now there's a problem, you can say, "Oh, you parasite." Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm not a parasite for doing what I do. I'm trying to tell the story of these people, and parasite is the wrong thing because it's part of a healthy body, a healthy human body, to have cells that tell you what's going on. That's not parasite. That's just part of the functioning society, and so you work it out. Anyway, the upshot is, if I go to Kyiv these days, I feel that I'm hanging out in far too many fancy restaurants and bars and not actually going to the front line, but I can't go to the front line. So I've said to myself, I'm 67 and I've hammered my body, and I fell over on black ice in December 23 while delivering crutches.
Yeah.
Oh, the irony.
The irony.
I'm hoping to go. My plan is next time I go to Kyiv will be in October. I'm going to do a quick plug. October the 4th for the 4th Vladimir Putin Do Fuck Off Festival. And this is a festival held near Putin's birthday, October the 7th. It's going to be Saturday, October the 4th. We have a bunch of people, Brit and American reporters, writers, journalists, Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian medics, funny Ukrainians, and all of it's in English, and we raise money for a basket of Ukrainian charities and raise awareness. So I'm going to go for that. I feel guilty that I'm not there at the moment, but I can't go to the front line. No. And the story, and you've been there, yep. And so I kind of, part of my thing is I can't go, but there are younger people who are kind of taking up the baton, because you can't run a fucking baton race if you're limping.
I wanted to go back to repression and these regimes that use it and the power of stories and humour. What is it, do you think, that they fear the most?
Ooh, humour. There's a guy who wrote a great book about cults. And I'm trying to work his name. I'm going to look it up on my phone while we're talking. So he was an American military psychiatrist, and he dealt with totalitarianism. It'll come to me. Anyway, he wrote this. He treated American GIs who'd been captured in the Korean War by the Chinese communists and brainwashed. And this was the first. And by the way, brainwashing, brainwashing is old. Stalin did brainwashing, but it was the Chinese communists who used this phrase. Actually, in Chinese ideograms, it's wash brain, kind of wash brain ink, yeah. And it becomes brainwashing. And he wrote this non-fiction book, sort of Mind Control and Totalitarianism. His first name's Robert, it'll come to me. Anyway, he wrote this book, and then a thriller writer wrote The Manchurian Candidate. And The Manchurian Candidate, by the way, he kind of copied out quite a chunk of Robert Graves' I, Claudius, who also had a rather saucy mother who was sort of mucking around and fucking with the mind of the hero. And there's a kind of weird, not the hero, but the anti-hero, but there's a weird, powerful and dark mother figure in The Manchurian Candidate. And this is just plain plagiarism. It's Richard Condon wrote the novel, but The Manchurian Candidate became a very, very powerful novel, did a bestseller, made into a film with Frank Sinatra. Then the Israelis borrowed the plot and did a TV series where one of their own soldiers had been kidnapped by Hezbollah and was turned into a kind of Hezbollah candidate. Yeah. Then the Americans saw that and they made Homeland all over again. And then the Manchurian, after the success of Homeland, The Manchurian Candidate was made into a second film, all this tells you that there are no new plots in Hollywood.
This is very true.
But also that brainwashing is a real thing we've got to contend with. And the American military psychiatrist who wrote this book, Mind Control, Anti-Totalitarianism, said, he wrote also about cults. And he said the thing that cult leaders hate the most is mockery and a sense of humour. And that's absolutely true. So in every single fascist or communist dictatorship, basically the brown-red colours meet in a horseshoe.
Yes.
All of them hate mockery and hate a sense of humour.
It's one of the first things they target, one of the first things Putin targeted as well when he became leader in 2000.
He switched off journalism.
Yeah.
In the very
humour.
At the moment, in August 2000, he was on holiday and the Kursk sank. The British and the Americans offered sub-rescue, and they had the facilities and had the Kremlin stepped on the gas. We could have saved some people, perhaps difficult, but we could. Instead, everybody on that submarine died. That didn't have to happen, but it happened because Putin was afraid. And at that moment, the Russian media went for him. And so what he did was he got his rich and powerful oligarch friends to take over those companies and switch them off. That was the end of civil society before the voting. So the voting system in Russia still exists, but the problem is because there's no honest journalism, there are no effective leaders of the opposition. The opposition requires journalists to tell the story, to mediate it, and there's lots of distractions and irritations with that relationship, but it works more or less. Opposition requires a free and honest media, and if you shoot the free and honest media, then your opposition dies, and that's what happened in Russia.
Or if you drown them out, which is something that I'm concerned that we're seeing here.
Yes.
Especially with the use of social media. We just talked about brainwashing.
Yes.
Timothy Schneider talks about this. There are many writers really sounding the klaxons on how dangerous social media has become. Should we be treating it like a critical national infrastructure, do you think?
Yes, I think critical national infrastructure sounds a bit fancy as I'm sinking the last bit of my gin and tonic, looking at me. But actually, in a funny way, Theo, I am part of, and so are you, part of a critical national infrastructure. But remember, I've been doing this. So I got my, I was an intern at The Economist in 1977 when I was 18. So I've been a journalist since 77. I got my job in the Sheffield Telegraph in 81. And in the 80s, I came up against Robert Maxwell and Rupert Murdoch and Calvin Mackenzie, who I doorstepped 3 times. And these people are monsters. Murdoch's still alive. Maxwell killed himself, I believe. Mackenzie, his homophobia, his hatred of Elton John, eventually blew up in his face in this disastrous court case. And it was just a revolting vendetta against a gay man who is a very successful rock star. But I think ordinary people were better served by the newspapers back in the 80s at the start of my career than they are by Elon Musk. And you can't see it, but I'm doing a Nazi salute as I say Elon Musk on his X. And the Chinese Communist Party's TikTok, or whoever cut out and runs it these days, but the Chinese Communist Party calls the shots. Ask TikTok about Tiananmen Square, and you'll find nothing. Or Zuckerberg's Facebook. None of this stuff tells truth to power in the round. And I find myself, so the reality is that, and this is frightening, during the Second World War, my dad was a ship's engineer in the Battle Atlantic. My mum was a she was a land girl, i.e. she went and picked fruit. She was an art student for terms, but some of the time the British government, because there was a national food emergency, people were starving, got students to go and pick fruit because there was a shortage and because people were starving. And that generation that fought fascism, that's all died out. Yeah. And now fascism is back.
Back in a big way.
And it's back in a big way. And so certainly on Twitter, people like Tommy Robinson, or rather as I like to call him, Tommy fucking Robinson, has got a bigger social media presence and more clout than I have. And when I tried to have a go at him, I made a mistake in that I wined and dined somebody who had been a real believer in him. But I had too much to drink. True, that's my fault. But also the BBC didn't stand by me. And actually, part of my job description as a pillar of the national infrastructure is every now and then to get drunk with Nazis because these people don't talk to you in a meeting room with over mineral water and fancy biscuits made of oats. They don't. But what really happened there, I think, with Tommy Robinson is that he had way more powerful, way more information intelligence on us and clout in social media than I had. And so my mistake was to misjudge just what a big target he was. And actually, it ended up me being the target and him being the shooter, i.e. the wrong way around. And that's something that somebody coming from legacy media, and I don't like the phrase, finds it very difficult to understand. But actually, as somebody who can colour the minds of millions, Tommy Robinson is more powerful than I am these days. And that is because social media is unpoliced. Now, the man is also a fraudster, corrupt, and he sows poison. Yes. And listen, radical Islam. I've been rocketed by the Taliban in the Swat Valley in Pakistan in 2009, I think it was, 2010. I've been chased by the Taliban in 2001 after 9/11 when we went to Kabul through Peshawar, and our driver sped up and there was a car behind of Italian journalists travelling a few hours later, and everybody in that car was murdered. So I know, and I covered every single terror attack in 2016 and 2017, the Bataclan in Paris, and then all of the attacks in London, all of them, the far right ones and the Islamist ones. So I know about radical Islam, and I'm not dozy about the threat. But it's nothing like the threat posed to our safety and security and well-being than that posed by Vladimir Putin. Yeah. And you wouldn't get that on social media because it's collated, whatever it is, by Elon Musk, who is more or less sympathetic to the Kremlin story and not the reality on the ground. So this is fucking frightening because even the monsters of Fleet Street in the 80s would have got the idea that the Kremlin is not the West friend.
And now we have it the other way around.
Yeah.
And what can, I'm a young journalist and I'm aiming to make most of my scratch from social media and Patreon, etc. If you are enjoying this program, then do sign up.
You can sign up to mine as well, Patreon at John Sweeney Raw, whatever it is.
How do we navigate this world when legacy, again, I don't like the term either, legacy media is difficult to break into, and there is so much room on social. I mean, one of our good friends, our mutual friends, Kaylin, makes a very good living off social media and does very good work despite being throttled, etc., by Musk and Zuckerberg. Well, I'm not sure about Zuckerberg, but Musk certainly.
Yeah, so Kalin is very, very, very good indeed. He's also irritatingly handsome, and that's a problem too. But essentially, I think what's happened is a small number of very, very rich and powerful oligarchs. I like the phrase, first coined, I think, by Boris Nemtsov, or first popularized by Boris Nemtsov, about rich, powerful Russians with no fucking soul. And that description now applies to quite a few people here, and certainly people in the States like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And what we've got to do is do exactly what the good Americans did in the 1890s, where American society, ordinary people in America, were sickened by the immense and stupid wealth of the Rockefellers, of the people the people who own Standard Oil, of the oil barons and the railway barons, and they decided, and laws were passed democratically through Congress, that they had to cut these barons down to size, and we have to do the same thing all over again. Now, I'm actually not in favour of saying there should be no such thing as billionaires, but they should be properly and effectively taxed. There's a big problem for society right now, and the Labour government's wrestling with it, is that we have an elderly population, an ageing population. We have left the European Union, by the way, because the Kremlin's Brexit. I think the Kremlin's dark money helped pay for Brexit, and I think the Kremlin's dark bots help push for a Brexit on social media. No question in my mind about that whatsoever. But what we've got is a kind of madness wherein ultra-rich people and ultra-rich organizations like Google and Amazon no longer pay effective tax in Britain. Yeah. And we have to, it helps if we're back inside the European Union, and I'm a Liberal Democrat, and I stood for Parliament and lost, but I'm very much a Liberal Democrat. I believe that we should rejoin the European Union because it would make the following easier. To say to the tech bros, you're paying your taxes fair and square, just like everybody else. So you can't park your taxes in a sunny place with shady people. You pay them here where you earn money. Google, are you listening? Social media, I get to this day a string of abuse from Tommy Robinson supporters and a whole bunch of people when I tweet about Ukraine or anything else. Now, these people present as Brits or Americans, or are they? Is it, am I talking to Stan from Liverpool, or am I talking to Stanislav from Volgodonsk? And I want to know that because they're calling me a paedophile. I'm not a paedophile. If I know who you are and you've got money, I'll sue you for that because it's a horrible allegation and it's not true. But all of this crap fires at you, and you cannot. I can't sue the platform. No, and I can't sue, and I don't have the money to try and work out. So now, occasionally, some of these people, particularly on the far right, are so stupid they leave in their trail of stuff clues to their identity. And one of them was a second-hand hot tub entrepreneur from Middlesbrough, and I identified who he was, and I had a little go back, and the guy said, "Oh, mate, sorry, just messing about," and because I identified him, but that was me using my journalistic guile rather than the chops to do this. And there was one time I had a death threat. I got in touch with the cops. I think this was 2019, something like this, and the police said we can't do this. Now I think there are units inside the police. Or MI5, MI6, GCHQ, who can do this, but they're too busy on national security threats to help someone out like me. And and I've still got slightly more than 250,000 followers on Twitter, for example, which I prefer to X. But what I would do with, and I argue for this, is that we should pass a law, is that you should be who you are on social media. If you're in the public square, you've got to, you should be who you are. I'm John Sweeney, Raw, R-O-A-R. Yeah. Everybody knows who I am. When somebody accuses me of something despicable, I want to know who they are. So and that, I think, properly secures and cements free speech. Because free speech isn't free if somebody from the shadows, from darkness, shouts abuse at you. That's not free speech. This person is hiding. Is it possible they're Russian, Iranian, Chinese?
Or threateningly, they change the narrative.
Yeah, and so the argument is changed, and the story is changed, and we're no longer living in a world that respects facts as facts. And that means we can have no common conversation, and that means that our democracy itself has been degraded. And of course, that makes it easier for the Kremlin's friends on the far right, people like Nigel Farage, and in Italy, Salvini, in France, Marine Le Pen, the AfD in Germany, to prosper.
We should be equal opportunity here, though, and also mention the far left, because that horseshoe does meet in the middle.
Yes. So one of the things that irritates me greatly is the stance of the RMT, which is essentially, I think it's the Railway and Maritime Union.
British union that
it's a British transport union, chiefly railway workers, and their leader is a guy called Eddie Dempsey, who's been in 2014 to the next hand out with the Ukrainian quislings who've taken the Kremlin's money, who buy the Kremlin's bullshit.
And wrote a fawning obit for one.
And wrote a fawning obit for one of Putin's killers. So, and very recently, the RMT Union Conference, they passed a motion against the Labour government's military support for Ukraine. And the terms of it is, we want peace. And this is the kind of rubbish the Trump White House is coming out. Yep. So from the far left and the far right, you have the language of peace, but really this is dross. This is utterly synthetic. What this means is we are singing with the Kremlin song sheet. Putin has invaded Ukraine. Ukraine's a democracy. Russia has no right whatsoever to a single square inch of Ukrainian territory. And they have prosecuted their evil war with a barbarism which is truly fucking shocking. Yeah. And some of the details I know and I can't talk about because it's too fucking horrible. And so I say to these people, stop this war, but not that one. Well, fuck you. I mean, go to Moscow and start saying, stop the war, and see what happens to you. If you're serious about doing it, you will end up dead.
I want to talk about values a little bit. And sort of on from that, a lot of people seem in our democracies to be losing faith with democracy itself. What do you have to say to them?
I go to Russia, go to China, and go to North Korea, and take out Animal Farm and start and try and translate it into Korean, and then see what happens. See what happens to you, and you won't like the experience. So there is what I feel that's happening is that there is a failure of human memory. That, as I said, the generation that fought the Second War, that fought fascism, was shifted significantly towards, I would say, towards liberal democracy, or you would say towards the Labour Party. But
not anymore, actually.
Well, yes. Anyway, I don't know how long Keir Starmer is going to be the Prime Minister. Not if it's. I don't know why it happened today, but if your Chancellor of the Exchequer is openly weeping in the House of Commons, That's not good.
No.
It's not good for her. I feel sorry for her as a human being, but I also, the markets, the bond markets are watching, and they need to know that the person in charge of our economy is strong and tough. And if that's not the case, then she's in trouble, and so is the Prime Minister. But that generation died out. And so it feels like these narratives that nationalism or uber nationalism, some kind of stuff that's trotted out by Nigel Farage, that's really good for us, and that's the way to go. This is dark nonsense. Listen, I'm extremely proud to be British. I love a pub. I love, I'm a bad Catholic, but actually I have a great soft spot for Anglican churches. And, I think one of my favourite poems is an Arundel Tomb by Philip Larkin. Snow fell undated. I love all of that. I love my country. I'm intensely proud to be English and British, and that also I'm very proud of my Irish ancestry too as well. And you can do that here. That's okay. But Farage is talking a kind of dark nonsense, which is that nationalism and some kind of that white people are under threat. That's not true. That's not true. There is a dark nostalgia that's haunting the world right now. And there are three things driving it. First of all is that actually what I call free trade, as a proper liberal, here in the National Liberal Club, I call it, but the other side call it globalism. And by the way, when I say the other side, Alexander Dugin, I met him and interviewed him, and he ran out on me because he didn't like my question. And my question was, I said, how many Russian opposition figures have been killed? And he said, Julian Assange. What about Julian Assange? And I said, oh, Julian Assange is dead, is he? And he said, this is a stupid question. And I said, wait, how many people have been killed under Obama? The interview took place in 2014, and he threw down the mic and ran away. So, and he was the first person to call me a globalist swine, the first person that I'd met. And now globalist swine or globalist is a big, big phrase. What that means is that free trade has lifted billions of people out of poverty. So at LSE in my first year, we started to see students from Mao's China, as was actually Mao died in 73, 74, something like this. He died in 74 maybe. So in 77, we started, and they wore Mao caps and stuff like that. They wore their paramilitary uniform at the LSE. And China lived, a billion people lived in poverty. Same pretty much for India. India lifted state controls of the economy, and the Chinese did the same. Actually, the Chinese first. What happened is 1 billion Chinese and 1 billion Indians have been lifted out of poverty. Now, they now make stuff that we used to. It doesn't matter because we've got an intelligence and education-based economy here which works brilliantly, apart from white working class people feel that they've been left behind, and they have a legitimate and fair grievance. And people like me and you, perhaps, have not listened properly to their grievances, but things aren't terrible here. And I think that they have been brainwashed by a dark nostalgia, what I would call like a dark valley, that everything was better then.
Schneider calls the politics of eternity. This is what Schneider calls the politics of eternity. Looking back. Wanting to go back to an eternal spot in history.
By the way, I think it's Snyder, not Schneider.
Is it Snyder?
It's Snyder.
Oh, I've been saying it wrong for the past 6 months.
Anyway, because I used to work for the BBC, the kind of thing a sound engineer would say, you're wrong. That's not very important. What is very important is this dark nostalgia, which people like, which is untrue. The worst thing, I think, is the vaccines. I'm old enough to have had a polio dose on a sugar cube, because it started out when I had it when I must have been about 5, something like this, when I'm at primary school. And I can remember the school nurse giving it to me, and she watched me like a hawk to see that I would swallow it.
I never had a polio dose.
No, you would have you had an injection?
I've had many injections. I don't know if I've had a polio.
No, you would have had a polio injection as a baby, because by the time you were grown up, they had a universal one.
Did you get smallpox?
Yeah, so I had everything. I'm running my memoirs at the moment, and I looked at the story of my grandfather and grandmother on both sides, and the number of people who died of injection, of untreatable diseases which are now treatable, is shocking. But again, the generation that lived through, this is an untreatable disease, meningitis, TB, the rest of it, I'm sorry, you know, your brother, your sister, your loved ones, they're going to die.
They're going to die. Yeah.
That generation that knew the wonder of vaccines is gone, and now it's possible for the President of the United States to hire a moron, RFK Jr., who is destroying vaccine immunity in the United States, and this is an evil thing, and and it's stupid, and it's based on a dark nostalgia. So the first thing, actually, there are 3 things that are causing us great trouble and degrading people's attachment to democracy. The first of which is the consequences of free trade creating white left behinds. And that is a real world problem we've got to deal with. But actually, there are 2 other problems. There's immigration. And again, the consequences of immigration are not visited fairly on rich and poor alike. They're visited more on poor people, i.e. you're more likely to have an asylum hospital in a poor area, not a rich area. But there are also problems in that the people who express their grievances are commonly poorly educated, and therefore can fall into word traps which people like me don't like. They can sound racist, maybe they are racist, but actually what's driving their grievance isn't racism, but a fear of their culture changing, of things changing, and their services diminishing. And the third issue is the poisoning of information. And the poisoning of information, so what you have is free trade / globalization, changing economic realities. In particular, life is not so good for people who have not gone to university, for example. Number 2, immigration. Number 3, the poisoning of information. And those 3 drive this. Now, there's a 4th thing, which is democracy depends on taxation. But if rich people, the very rich people and organizations like Google, etc., are able to say, hey, I don't want to pay this tax, I'm going to move all my money out offshore, then, or to another jurisdiction, which they're doing all the time, then what you end up doing is putting the tax burden on ordinary people who feel they're suffering from free trade, feel they're suffering from immigration, and that anxiety is enhanced by a poisoned information system. So we're in trouble across the world. And you can watch, the election. I was watching the election in Romania, and it was by a knife edge.
It was, yeah.
By a knife edge that the good guy won and the bad guy was defeated. Of course, the Kremlin are pushing in.
And Simeon still claims he was not actually defeated.
Yeah. Trump's in power, and Trump is a danger to everything any civilized human being would believes in. No question in my mind. And the latest news is, like in the last day or two, that the Americans are no longer going to supply Patriots to Ukraine.
Yeah, they've stopped the latest batch, which was a promised batch from Biden. So
yeah.
Trump's an oath breaker.
And so what that means is that more Ukrainian civilians will get murdered.
Yeah.
And this is a policy which is driven by those three factors.
Hello, listeners. This is Theo as of the 25th of July, 2025. Since I interviewed John, the Trump administration has reversed its decision, and now patriots are arriving in Ukraine. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
But the reality is that, I'm 67, so I can remember what London was like in the 70s. There were a couple of good restaurants I could afford. One was Italian, one was a curry house. Hardly anything else to eat that was good. It was only when I sort of lucked into some money by writing stuff or started to make my way in the world that I could start. And even then, food was terrible in London in the 70s. And so you can knock immigration, but we can walk within a quarter of a mile here. You can eat some of the best food in the world: Japanese, Indian, Colombian, Ukrainian, extraordinary cuisines like that. A massive change for the good. Health, a massive change for the good. Road safety, murder, a massive change for the good. The chances of my son or me being in a third world war far less reduced, though Trump is now doing his very best, it seems, to make things worse. So this dark nostalgia tells ordinary people a lie. Life is better now than it's ever been, but people don't get it.
These other actors, the bad actors, Trump and Putin, others like him. I'm going to name Viktor Orban, Xi.
Yeah, Xi is waiting in the wings.
Oh yeah, he's just waiting.
The Chinese have got an issue. Anyway, go on.
What kind of world, paint a picture of the kind of world that they would have us live in? Okay,
so it would be the reason I'm against this stuff is it'd be so fucking boring. But, you go on the train from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and I did it once in 2018, and there was a rich thug, and he had a black T-shirt with Putin's face on it. So it's if Nigel Farage gets in and as sort of Labour is in trouble, as you see, it's quite possible that Nigel Farage could be the next British Prime Minister. It's no longer that's quite possible. We'd start having to wear Nigel Farage T-shirts willy-nilly.
Really?
Yeah. He'd do what Trump has done, appoint his policemen everywhere. You would have the BBC taken over by reform people, and they would, they'd cut it down, but they wouldn't kill it. They would just, and this is what's kind of happening in America. And then suddenly, the far right don't have to, the far right leaders don't have to hit anyone. They just send the appropriate messages on Elon Musk's network, for example, and then you get, and then the followers deliver the death threats. That happens both on the left and the right. Yeah. It's a great argument for civility, but that's happening in real time, and it's very, very scary. Very, very scary.
On to values again. Actually, not values. Bugger that. We'll come back to that.
By the way, how long have we been gassing for?
We've been gassing for 54 minutes.
Okay.
So I have 2.5 more questions.
Okay. I'll give a brief answer to all of them. Yes, no, and fuck
You've
off.
doorstepped You've doorstepped Vladimir Putin and you've annoyed Donald Trump in an interview. When you meet these people, these wannabe, well, one's a dictator, one's a wannabe dictator, these oligarchs, these unpleasant men, what's your impression?
Trump is a monstrous narcissist. He's a toddler. His mum, I interviewed for my book, Killer in the Kremlin, I interviewed a series of, I interviewed two psychiatrists, a Ukrainian one, Semen Gruzman, and an American one, I've forgotten his name, but he was very good. And he did a study of all of the big dictators, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and what was interesting about them is that all of them were deprived a natural mother. So at some point, their mother dies or disappears from the scene, and they are adopted, or there's something going wrong, and they very, very early on, when they're a toddler, they lose their mother. Commonly, they've been sexually abused very, very early on, and they develop the sort of pitiless monsterness of a toddler, an extraordinary ability to lie with no compunction, with no sense of guilt whatsoever, because they have no sense of guilt, no sense of empathy. So they have this perfect model to become a monster on a large scale, because they have no normal human emotions of kindness or sympathy or empathy. All of that they miss. So that they're incredibly effective because they can lie through their teeth. And by the way, Trump's mother was seriously ill from when he was about 1.5 to about 3. So Trump is an enormous toddler who doesn't care what's happening to ordinary Ukrainians who are being murdered by the fascist Russian invaders. He just cares whether Putin says something nice about him. And his entire worldview changes on Putin's compliments. And that is terrifying and terrible. But just on meeting Trump, you could tell that he was a child, a toddler, and you could tell that he was utterly untrustworthy. So I think when people like Keir Starmer and Rutte, the head of NATO, kneel before him, they are making a terrible mistake and they're wasting their time. You've got to stand up to him. He kind of respects that. Anything else? Not at all. Putin was far more frightening and more dangerous. He's the more powerful man. And he believes he too, the story around his birth parents is weird. So his mum was 41 when she had him, and she lived through the siege of Leningrad, where cannibalism was rife. I don't believe that a woman who lived through that could have had a kid like Putin. And apparently with Oliver Stone and stuff like that, Putin is so distracted and uninterested in his parents, his official parents, you feel like it's not real. It's not real. So I think Putin is also, like Hitler, Stalin, Mao, is a classic psychopathic leader who had an arrested childhood, whose real mother wasn't there, who was sad and lonely as a child and has never recovered from that, and therefore has no empathy. And the thing that saved him was he joined the KGB, and the KGB became his family. So how fucked can you be if your mum is a bunch of secret policemen? And that's who mother is in his view. And there's something he's effeminate. I go into this, he kind of came on to me a little bit because when I doorstepped him, he was kind of impressed by my balls in some way. but I declined the offer. The offer wasn't made. I'm joking. You can read about it in Killing the Kremlin if you want to know more. But I also felt they were both puny.
Small men.
Yeah.
Finally, on to, when I say, this is a question I ask all of my interviewees, because this is what the podcast is about. When I say the words freedom, democracy, what kind of images do they conjure in your mind, and what's their value?
One of my great friends in life is a guy called Andrew Billen, who works on the Sheffield Telegraph, Sheffield Star. I was on the Sheffield Telegraph, and he was, and he's now a lovely and very good feature writer on the Times. His dad, Roy Billen, was a pilot in Bomber Command. And I did like 70 missions over Germany, way too many. 70. And he loved the pint, and I'm a drinker. Andrew's far more fastidious. And so Roy used to joke that I was the son he'd never had and all that kind of stuff. And I asked him, what about the bombing poor civilians? And he said, listen, we didn't want to kill anyone. But we had to kill the Nazis because otherwise they were going to kill us. And I understand that. And actually, I still go to the Bomber Command memorial in Green Park, and I look about it, and I think about it because it's something that worries me. But one of my great heroes in life was a Church of England padre who, representing the bomber crews, who in 1944 stood up after a briefing and said, we're killing too many civilians. And he was allowed to do so. So democracy is about creating the space for free speech, and after free speech, you stay alive and you stay in your job. It is about respect. There's a wonderful Czech dissident called Ludvík Vitsulik, who I went undercover to Czechoslovakia in '88, and I met Václav Havel when he was a janitor. By the way, he's like Mr. Wheezy from Toy Story, chain smoke. But the other guy is really funny, Ludvík Vitsulik, and he loved life, and he went and shagged his girlfriend in a cemetery on a hot summer's night, and then took pictures on an old Kodak camera and he took the cameras, the pictures along to the to Czech commie boots, because this is under communism in '88, to be developed. And they gave them to the secret police, and the pictures appeared on the front page of the Communist Popular Daily to fuck him, because he was a signature. And to be fair to him, he sued the Ministry of Interior for breach of his privacy. And funnily enough, the Ministry of Interior and the courts they controlled did not find against the secret police.
Funnily
enough, but what was good about Ludvík was he had the raw courage, humiliating and embarrassing as this was, to sue them. And I interviewed him about it, and he said, human wisdom is about respect for the other, about the different, and he's talking about women here, but I love the phrasing of it. Human wisdom about respect for the other, the different, and simply the unobtainable. He's talking about women he really fancied, that you respect them by not going there. And I thought, this is what I believe in. And, I personally haven't shagged my girlfriend in a cemetery, but when I get round to it, what the secret police, the Czech secret police, were seeking to do was to humiliate him. But nevertheless, he was a member of the aristocracy of the human soul, and he fought against that. And even in these circumstances, he retained his wry sense of humour, and that is something I aspire to. I admired him greatly. And I admire everybody else who, under extreme pressure, can crack a joke, can think about the other.
My final question, this tends to be quite a short one. Do you have a message to send to the oligarchs, the autocrats, and the dictators of the world?
Yeah, it's the one I close all my diaries, the war diaries I did from Kyiv, and when I go back there, I hope to do them again. And it goes for all of them, but I'm thinking of one in particular, and his name is Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, do fuck off.
John, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your time.
Cheers.
Cheers. That has been Why We Fight. Thank you very much for joining us.
That's it for this episode of Why We Fight. What struck you most about their story? What did you agree or disagree with? Drop a comment and let us know. And if this conversation meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who cares about democracy as much as you do. To get early access and support independent journalism, join us on Patreon or Substack. Links are in the description. And if you want to connect with a global community of people who care about freedom and human rights, come hang out with us on Discord. Until next time, remember, democracy is non-negotiable.